We have to be careful who we listen to, especially when it comes to our power. Promoting our interest and preserving our heritage is our power. The enemy certainly knows that. That's why they've been attacking it. We are an oppressed people. That is not news, but too many of us seem to want to live in a land of denial and make-believe. We want to pretend as if that's not the circumstance that we're in. A lot of the behaviors that you see us exhibiting as a group are not ones that we came about of our own accord. It's things that have been foisted upon us. Too many times we've allowed the dominant society to assign to us what our identity is, as opposed to choosing and acting for ourselves. This is what goes along part and parcel with oppression. You're able to deny the oppressed group resources that they need. You're able to tamper with their internal politics and try to derange and derail their plans for themselves. And we see it most sharply expressed in the white media. This idea that all of these self-destructive behaviors that black people as a group in this country engage in is just the way we are. No, in a large part it is the way that we have been conditioned to be by outside forces who have used their massive economy for the sake of encouraging us to do things that are against our interests. And that brings us to these two individuals, Whitney Beatty and Ebony Anderson. Now, whenever it comes to discussing things, particularly about marijuana, there's a big number of black folks, even in spaces like this, who need to get their minds right. Now, perhaps you've heard of Miss Beatty and Anderson, at least the last 6 months or so. You were supposed to. The white media want to make sure that you did. Just dealing with Byron Allen's LGBT advocacy website, The Griot, for example, from their article, which reads more like a paid advertisement, they gushed that these two are starting a marijuana dispensary. And according to the article, they also prioritize shelf space to women-led and people of color cannabis brands. They set up shop near the heart of Black Los Angeles and make a space curated specifically for and by black women, so they could prioritize shelf space for women-led and people of color brands. Well, that's very interesting and ominous. Whenever we see the white media or their black sock puppets bigging up some people, some strangers, some interlopers who we never heard of, it ain't long at all before the whammy-bammy comes in. We go from saying black to saying women-led, that's that feminist talk, that's the button they're pushing, and people of color. Oh, yes, we can't have an article go by without making sure that we mention everybody. As always, we see the same old pathetic pivot from black to people of color and women. I'm sure the white women who work to have the police, zoning boards, health inspectors, and other governmental groups shut black businesses down, I'm sure they will be only too happy to occupy, or should I say colonize, your shelf space. And as for people of color, you do realize that includes the exact same Korean businesses who routinely assault and beat up black women who patronize their beauty shops. Today, practically all black women get their beauty supplies from Asian-owned companies, who buy absolutely nothing from black people, and who have been caught on video attacking black people who patronize their stores. You cannot have it where the cash flow only goes in one direction and call that some sort of partnership or say that we're doing business. That's not business. But that is what's going on here. And the Griot wants you to see this as a W for black people. Wait, I mean for black women, because that was the entire crux of this article. In fact, it seems to be the crux of everything that these two were involved in. And I know there's always a few lurkers here who support these bootlicks and are always making excuses for them and trying to run interference for them. When I tell you that they're trying to bring in as many non-black people into the mix as possible, they said it themselves. In an interview with the feminist rag Essence website back in June, when talking about their so-called partnership with the parent company, Whitney Beatty said, "This partnership is a game changer for us. Not only does it allow us to have the capital necessary to open up our store and build the Josephine and Billy's community, it also allows us to create opportunities for other black and brown cannabis cultivators and manufacturers along the supply chain." Other black and brown cannabis cultivate, blah, blah, blah. That's sprinkling sugar on crap. First of all, let's put aside how retarded it is to call someone who grows pot a manufacturer. That's like calling a cattle rancher a manufacturer of beef, but I digress. Considering how plentiful marijuana cultivation is in Mexico and their close proximity to California, does anyone think that the brown cultivators and manufacturers cannot flood these two eggheads with product? Secondly, can you name any black cultivators or manufacturers of marijuana? These states do everything they can to deny black business people a dispensary license. And if by incident you do happen to get one, then they do what they always do to every type of black business. They send in the health inspectors or building inspectors, the fire marshals, the zoning board representatives, all with claims that you violated some city ordinance or other, and they gotta shut you down. But for some strange reason, that seems to be an issue that Beatty and Anderson aren't having. Indeed, they're getting wall-to-wall coverage from these black bootlick media types. Apparently, nobody seems to see them as a threat, and I have to wonder why. When you see some Negroes who the white media or their black bootlick sock puppets are giving attention to, that's how you know they're on the take. So for this Beatty woman to use the word black to camouflage what they're doing is ridiculous. Always the gender warring with these clowns, but when you received every crumb of your daily bread from white supremacy, or in the case of Byron Allen, a white media suck-up, then you're going to talk like them and regurgitate their crap talking points because that's what you have to do to get your next crumb. Or to hopefully prove your bootlick credentials to whatever white media outlet you're desperately hoping to prove yourself to. These morons have created their own twisted, sick internal culture, where these asinine phrases are basically their entire vocabulary. It doesn't work in the real world, but that's the entire point. White supremacy's provided these clowns with make-work token jobs, where they've taken refuge from reality. White supremacy's given them their own little bubble, or should I say, safe space. And you notice that this Whitney Beatty woman has the Bunny Ruckus blonde weave thing going. Also the oversized California eyeglasses, like it's the 1970s or something. You don't use eyeglasses like that to see things, you use them as a way to get noticed. But the only thing tackier than her fashion sense is her attempt to link marijuana to black icons, and to get black people to think of this as our heritage and our culture. These potheads are calling their little hemp store Josephine and Billy's, after Josephine Baker and Billie Holiday. That, to me, is blasphemous. Trying to take their little pothead shop and this little devious plan that they've got to be driving wedges between black men and black women and undermining our community with this garbage, and trying to wrap it up in the respectability of our icons. Billie Holiday was a victim of white supremacy. The animals who run this satanic prison calling itself a society, they tormented Billie Holiday her entire life until they eventually hounded her into an early grave. Billie Holiday had fallen heavy into substance abuse, and she didn't enjoy it. Opium, cocaine, marijuana, alcohol. You want to know why she did all that? Because of the white supremacy she had to endure every single day of her life. She was a perpetual target of the evil white supremacist government of this country. She didn't do all that drinking and smoking drugs because she wanted to. She didn't do it to feel good. She was doing it to dull the pain of being a black person in this white supremacist hellhole. And she died as a result of that. So no, you are not honoring Billie Holiday by naming your marijuana shop after her. This is what Byron Allen's Griot website is doing. This is what Essence is doing. You have two allegedly black women who are trying to make Billie Holiday's name synonymous with marijuana. This is honoring Billie Holiday's memory. All of these little articles talking about these two using the same cut and paste language. Their shop has an aesthetic reminiscent of the Harlem Renaissance and the jazz scene. They're over there in freaking California. Meanwhile, the real Harlem where all that stuff was going on is being gentrified out of existence. One has to wonder if they're going to be doing anything about that or saying anything about that. Up until now, most of you only associated Billie Holiday with her iconic song Strange Fruit. But now you have white supremacy using its feminist flunkies to try to associate Billie Holiday's name with drugs. Which, by the way, was exactly what the white media did to her when she was alive. Even on the day of her death, that's all they talked about. As Eddie Griffin said, they don't let us get out of the game clean. And just in case black people rehabilitate your image as we had done with Billie Holiday, just in case black folks rehabilitate your reputation after your death, then they'll go and send in some black bootlick scumbags to sling more slime on you. This is profane what these two are doing. It is satanic and vile, which is why the white media and their bootlick sock puppets are trying so hard to big them up. A pathetic attempt to use black people's history as a way to sanitize and make something valorous out of black people who are losing their minds to drug use, black people who are killing themselves day by day. White supremacy is prosecuting a race war against us, and we're supposed to be fighting back, but in war you only carry with you what you absolutely need. Now, you can either carry your ammunition to fight white supremacy, or you can carry narcotics so you can get high. You can't do both. I've been telling you for the longest time about the damage that marijuana does to you. You think they're pushing this stuff on black people because they like you? I posted on my Twitter a few weeks ago about cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It's a condition that leads to repeated severe bouts of vomiting as the result of long-term use of marijuana. I and others have also pointed out to you that marijuana lowers sperm count. It also negatively impacts women's ovulation. Since the days of Margaret Sanger, white supremacy's been trying to find a way to chemically castrate black men and to chemically sterilize black women. How better to do it than to get black people to chemically sterilize themselves? Make a culture out of it, a subculture. Make black folks think that it's glamorous. The same MTV that refused to show black musicians on their network when they first started up and who considered rap music to be merely a fad were only too eager to put on any rapper who was seen as glamorizing getting high. What, you think they did that to do us any favors? So when I see the white media's black bootlicks trying to prop up fools who are telling black people, oh, look at this, we're going to have a marijuana dispensary and it's going to be dressed up, the shop will be dressed up to make it reminiscent of the Harlem Renaissance. This is what the white media's always done. Co-opt black culture and then sell our own culture back to us as if they were the ones who invented it, as if they were the ones who own it. Using nostalgia to bait us into our own destruction. We are a people who are supposed to understand the value of our history. But if someone teaches you a false memory of the past, you have no hope for a future. If somebody indoctrinates you with the idea that smoking weed, getting high, and getting blowed is somehow part of our heritage, then they've served you poison in a candy coating. Just because a group of black people did something, that doesn't mean that it was right. That doesn't mean that it's our heritage or that it's something that we want to continue. It just means that there was some black folks doing. And we better start drawing some distinctions, by the way. This is what Byron Allen's The Grio's putting out there. The white media has made a big push in the last 12 months, and especially the last 3 or so months, to promote these bootlick phony mouthpieces who claim to be media for black people. Dope advocacy belongs in rags like High Times, look it up. It doesn't belong in the black media. There's nothing glamorous about being a pothead. There's nothing glamorous about living your life in a fog. There's nothing beautiful about being intoxicated. And no, you don't look cool while doing it. Our people need to be sober, sharp, and alert. We are at war. And if you let these bootlicks convince you that you can go through war being casual, then the only thing you'll become is a casualty. There's a huge difference between history and heritage. And you need to recognize the difference and not let the white media's bootlicks con you into taking on self-destructive behavior and trying to rationalize it as being our heritage. When in reality, it's the dysfunctional part of our history. It needs to be jettisoned and done away with and forgotten. Now, first of all, we need to define terms. What is heritage? The etymological roots of the word heritage come from the French word hériter, which means inherit or to make an heir. So heritage means to inherit. Did our ancestors pass down drug addiction and getting blowed all day as our inheritance? When they built the Black Wall Streets, were they making it a point to have drug dispensaries too? Did they want that for their children? Did they want to give that to their children as their inheritance? So let's understand that just because something is part of our history, that does not make it a part of our heritage. Everything happens in history. Slavery, the massive dehumanization, the butchery and barbarism, the bedwenching, the buck dancing, all of that happens to be part of history with our people, but that is not our heritage, and you better draw a line. Don't let some scum-sucking, intersectional, zaddy-worshipping bootlick for the white media tell you otherwise. Being drug addicts is not part of our culture. This is bootlicks trying to take the dysfunction and problems that we've had foisted upon us by our oppression and then tell us this is who we are. Being a bedwench is part of history, but that's not part of our heritage. Listen, nobody, I don't give a rip who tries to tell you otherwise, nobody uses drugs to feel good. They use it as a way to anesthetize themselves. Either because they're in too much pain to fight white supremacy and they don't see another way to get away from the pain to escape it, or because they've just given up altogether. I told you about the Opium Wars, where the British used opium grown in India and pushed it in massive amounts onto the Chinese. It was the British attempting to soften China up for invasion. The Emperor of China saw what was happening and he put a stop to it. This is the domestic variation on the same theme. You need to understand how insidious this stuff is. This article quotes this Anderson woman as saying, "We have curated a space where women feel safe to explore cannabis products and learn about herbal wellness." First of all, let's expose this safe space crap. That's white feminist dogma. That's the language that you get from these white feminists, and you see these black feminists using that garbage. That's where they got it from, white feminists, and that kind of talk has no place in our community. Where are black men barging into black women's spaces? You go to any hospital or any healthcare facility in this country, and you'll see plenty of black women working behind the desks, and you'll see black men at best who are either orderlies, janitors, or at best nursing assistants. But what you won't see are black men doing or saying anything to make black women feel unsafe, whatever that's supposed to mean. And for these heifers, that definition, safe or unsafe, it seems to be so broad it can mean anything. Which is exactly the point. But you know who is making black women less safe? A lot of these white supremacists who they work in these offices with. You got white nurses who call black babies little satans, white doctors and nurses who ignore a black child in medical distress until the child flatlines. Who's creating a safe space for black women against that? Because that's who's actually making unsafe spaces for black women. That's who black women need a safe space from. A safe space indeed. A safe space to do what? Well, so you can get high. Well, a safe space that makes it where you can get high is a place that makes it where your senses are so dulled you have no idea that you're in danger and you're in no condition to fight against it. That doesn't sound like a safe space at all. It sounds like the opposite of a safe space. I mean, we got some real Orwellian doublespeak going on here. Safe space indeed. Though it sounds a hell of a lot more like a trick bag or a trap. But these black feminists don't care about that. The black feminists have internalized and amplified the monstrous attitude of the white supremacists who they idolize and wish they could be. White supremacists don't care about their survival first. They care about their control of everyone else, specifically black people. That's at the top of their list of priorities. Black feminists don't care about their survival either. They care about being close to white power, because to them, their fever dream delusion of being Olivia Pope or Olivia Newton-John, that's their power. They just never get the chance to have it. And if they could just prove their loyalty to white supremacy, why, one day they're going to wake up and be blonde-haired and blue-eyed. That's what you see with this Beatty woman. This is an aspiring Becky you got here. Why, that blonde hair and blue eyes is so close she can taste it. So whenever you hear one of these black feminists jabbering about safe spaces, that's how you know you've identified an operative for white supremacy. This is more about self-hating Alice Walker, Toni Morrison crap. The black feminists hated being black. They despise their own black skin. They idolize blonde-haired, blue-eyed white women. They want to be white women, and they're furious that it's never going to happen, so they vent their insanity and rage at black men. Now, are these two immigrants or perhaps intersectionalists? Perhaps they're LGBT, I don't know. But it's worth discussing because they're trashing the names of two of our DAS/FBA icons in their attempt to drum up some business for their weed shop. And they're also trying to push the lie that black women are not safe, particularly around black men, because we see the same phraseology used by LGBT activists countless times, and they also use it when talking about black men. Now, I think I should say in passing, I am aware that the same LGBT community who ignored the murder spree of Ed Buck, who murdered at least 2 black gay men and raped who knows how many others, the same LGBT community who has been silent as the grave about Jussie Smollett's trial, these are the same ones who are claiming that Billie Holiday and Josephine Baker were bisexual. And you know, family, we need to stop being so acquiescent on these points whenever somebody brings that up and just go, well, if somebody said it, it must be true. They do this with all black icons. They even tried that with Malcolm X. They had to drop that one, but it was only because they got so much pushback. Problem is, on too many of these others, they're not getting pushback at all. You see, there seems to be no black person who they won't claim was homosexual, or at the very least, they'll say bisexual. Again, just like safe space, that's a phrase which the way they use it is so vague, so broad, it can include anyone at all, which seems to be the entire point. In too many cases, these activists have made it clear that in their minds, everyone is a repressed homosexual. That it's just they're too afraid to admit it. It reminds me of how you had that clown David Johns. He was on the Breakfast Schlubs on the very notable famous broadcast where Malik Yoba announced that he was stepping up. But you'll recall that David Johns, among his many blatherings and brain farts, he dropped this particular pearl of wisdom.
Right? Why do we ask boys to go into one bathroom and girls to go in another publicly when y'all bathrooms at homes are inclusive bathrooms? They are trans bathrooms.
Everything is LGBT. And you better be very careful when you let people get away with saying stuff like that. Keep in mind, that kind of talking point draws from the exact same well as the lie that, well, we're all a little bit racist. Everyone's a little bit racist. Everybody does it. You're already engaging in racist behavior. You do it all the time. You just don't call it that. The only people who that line of rhetoric benefits are the racists. And that's who this David Johns draws from the well of. That's a line of reasoning that he employs here. Everyone wants to appropriate our history because ours is a unique history of an oppressed people who came to define the culture of the society that oppressed them. And that culture has been so dynamic, so unique, so powerful, that it's become the envy of the rest of the human race. So of course people who had nothing to do with our history and heritage would want to find a way to lay claim to it, even if they have to lie. But my point is that these two, with their blatantly man-hating language, made it clear what they're about. This is not merely a slap in the face of the black community. This is not merely desecrating our icons as part of the continuing effort to try to rewire and try to mangle and mutilate our heritage and our history. While it is true that Billie Holiday may have used narcotics, it's also true that that was only a small part of what she did. It was her at her lowest. We celebrate and revere her at her best. We talk about the other 99% of what she was and what she did. For somebody to call themselves naming a pot shop after Billie Holiday, that is to emphasize one part of her life, the lowest part of her life, at the expense of everything else about her. You're ignoring Billie Holiday. You are denigrating her. You don't honor her by doing that. You don't honor Josephine Baker by doing that either. And this is what Byron Allen and the rest of the black bootlick media props up. The black media has been documenting for the longest time that whenever you've seen states like Colorado and others legalize marijuana, for some dang reason, black folks still keep getting hemmed up over it, still keep getting arrested over it, and still get sent to jail over it. They just do it under different pretenses. And as far as the sale of marijuana goes, they got no problem with that, as long as it's white supremacy selling the marijuana to black people. We should have a rule about these kind of things. You notice that I am not sitting here telling you, you shouldn't own a marijuana dispensary. I'm fine with black people owning a marijuana dispensary. I am not fine, however, with black people using the product. And I'm also not fine with having a bunch of white money propped up bootlick operatives, interlopers coming into our community and attempting to co-opt our history and our icons as nothing more than a gateway drug to feminism, intersectionalism, and asinine alliances that do not work. I'm fine with black people owning weed dispensaries. I'm fine with it. In fact, we should do what this white supremacist society's done to us. Make sure you set up the dispensary as close to the schools as possible. Make sure that they're on the white side of town. You want it to be within easy reach of all those residents. Make sure that they have access to it. Because if it's okay to have a liquor store on every corner in the black neighborhoods, especially liquor stores that black people do not own, who put nothing into the community but take money out of it, while breeding all sorts of otherwise undesirable behavior and elements in the area, well, in that case, then you shouldn't have a problem when it happens in other people's neighborhoods. But somehow I think that having black people owning marijuana dispensaries in predominantly white areas will be greeted the same way as black people who own a restaurant in a predominantly white area or in an area where the white supremacists think they've got sway with the local governmental authorities. This video address happens to be about marijuana and at the same time is not about marijuana at all. The same way that this putrid little defecating on our icons has nothing to do with Josephine Baker and nothing to do with Billie Holiday. And it has everything to do with the continued onslaught against the things that are precious to us, the nonstop effort to redefine it and mangle it and twist it and pervert it until it says what white supremacy wants it to say. As Malcolm said, every time you break that seal on a liquor bottle, that's a government seal you're breaking, and he's absolutely right. Because if they didn't want you to have it, you wouldn't. Don't believe me? Just out of curiosity, how much money you got in your pocket? Yeah, there's trillions of dollars floating around, but for some damn reason, these white supremacists are excellent at making sure you don't get any. When's the last time or any time that the white media or their black bootlicks have made it a point to prop up somebody who's talking about this empowerment stuff, things that's going to put you in the driver's seat? Oh, if weed dispensaries are so great, then how the hell is it that these guys are not doing non-stop, around-the-clock coverage, asking why is it that you got these members of government stopping black people from getting into the game then? Why is it that they're not making that their focus? Oh yeah, they'll talk about somebody who gets a weed shop for the sake of glamorizing it to you, but they don't talk about it in terms of the economy. They don't talk about it in terms of black people realizing the income. It's always dressed up in, oh, look how nice it is. They've got a weed shop that's themed like a Harlem Renaissance speakeasy. Well, that's not who we are, and that's not what we're about. You wouldn't be able to blow a puff of weed smoke thick enough to make it where we couldn't see through this white supremacist strategy. And on a final note about this story, yes, I'm sure you've noticed all over it that they got Jay-Z's name on there. Apparently, he's associated with the parent company as their chief visionary officer, whatever the hell that means. But the thing is, Jay-Z's lending out his name to a number of entities. But the one thing that you're not seeing him doing is leading the charge to put consequences on people who try to get in the way of black folks having our piece of this economy. Because that's what matters. If you're not talking about putting serious consequences on the practitioners of white supremacy when they keep abusing and misusing these governmental offices to either block us from being able to start businesses or to persecute us out of business whenever we do, then you're not talking about anything. But Jay-Z is the chief visionary officer for this parent company, whatever the heck this is. Their website does list their board, but it doesn't show pictures of them. I had to go elsewhere to get the pictures. But it was interesting who is among their board of directors. Carol Bartz, former president of Yahoo. They've got one black person on the board. George Foreman's son, apparently, is who this guy is. And they've also got a Hispanic woman who had something to do with Rock Nation, I suppose. I think that's particularly amusing in a macabre, perverse kind of way. Because back in the 90s, you'll recall there were a lot of these up-and-coming rappers, especially Jay-Z, who every time you looked up, they had all of these Hispanic women with them. Puff Daddy running around with Jennifer Lopez, Jay-Z running around with Gloria Velez. Oh yeah, it seemed like if you had some up-and-coming black rapper, here he was with a Hispanic woman on his arm. Some people tried to laugh that off, but it stopped being funny when you saw companies like BET who made it very clear they wanted Hispanic women to be the receptionists and basically the female faces of the company. So you've got these two black women here naming their little pot shop after two black female icons. And yet you look at the board of directors of this company, there's no black women represented there at all. And the closest to representation you've got on that board at all is one of George Foreman's sons, and some woman who had something to do with Jay-Z's company. Jay-Z must be proud. Apparently he and Rihanna became investors along with some other folk who are of very little consequence, but I'm willing to bet that Jay-Z will represent black people's interests at the parent company about as well as he did at that other white company he was associated with, the NFL. And if you think that all this is going to be of any benefit to black people whatsoever, then I gotta ask you, what the hell are you smoking? Black media only exists because of you. If you appreciate the kind of uncompromising commentary and insight you receive in places like this, then be sure to visit the Cash App and also give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that.